Oh, I'm excited. We're going to continue on our series of the fear of the Lord. And I want to ask you to start with a question. What makes you fear something? What makes you fear something? Maybe it's the unknown. Maybe it's the risk. I don't know if you know me, I'm a little bit of a risk taker, but I'm a calculated risk taker. There's those people out there that are risk takers that are like they don't care at all, right? And then there's the other people that are just too scared of they think of all the things that could go wrong. Maybe we're afraid of pain. Maybe we're afraid of loss. Maybe we're afraid of regret. Or maybe it's just overwhelming power. We fear what we believe is greater than us and what we can't control. We live in a world that's obsessed with power and authority and control and image and pride. And at the same time, we've lost our fear and awe of God. Ultimately, people want to be God rather than fear God. When you're disobedient, I talked a little bit about this in our class this morning. When you're disobedient, yeah, you're telling God, don't worry, I don't trust you. I got this figured out. I know better than you. But when we encounter God, when we encounter the true God, we will be in awe now or later, and it will happen. And when people encounter him, they're going to be gripped by awe. When Jesus was walking among people and doing miraculous things in Luke 9:43, it tells us awe gripped the people as they saw this majestic display of God's power. And that was just the appetizer. It's going to get better. But awe gripped the people. The fear of the Lord is not fear and awe that immobilizes us, but it inspires us. It inspires us with joy and with praise. In Psalm 112, it says, "Praise the Lord. How joyful are those who fear the Lord and delight in obeying his commands." So a question for you to think about: have you lost your fear and awe of God? Have you forgotten who it is that we serve? Do you delight in obeying his commands? Or do you do it begrudgingly? Have you become apathetic to disobedience? Have you become apathetic to sin, to disrespect, to authority? You cannot live in right relationship with God if you have lost awe of who he is. It's all about relationship. We talked about this last. It's all about relationship. If you want to have a right relationship with God, it has to be in the fear of the Lord. You cannot live right with God if you've lost your fear of the Lord. And it's not intimidation. It's not intimidation. It's alignment and right relationship. Nobody likes talking about fear, or if they do, they're talking about all the things they're scared of and all of this. But the fear of the Lord is the key to having a right relationship with God. And so we want to dive into this. And to truly fear the Lord, we first have to understand his power. What do you think of when you hear the word power? Because God's power is completely unmatched. But when we think about power, I didn't have this in my notes, but I was talking about, I think about horsepower, right? Anybody into cars? And you think about power and you think about how many horsepower it has, and that actually came from horses. It's how many actual horses. I just think it's interesting. We're still using horsepower today, and we haven't used horses for a lot of things for a long time. But what do you think about with power? Do you think of like a tornado? Like, is that power? Is that awesome power? I remember there happened to be a tornado that hit my friend's hometown a number of years back. And I remember he was telling me a story about how he showed up there and there were pieces of straw in trees, driven into a tree. Think about the power that it takes to take a piece of straw and drive it into a tree. That's power. That's awesome power, right? There are so many things. So I want to read a few passages that just talk about God's power. I want to put this in perspective this morning. So we're going to start out in Psalm 33, verse 6 through 9. It says, "The Lord merely spoke and the heavens were created." That's power. That's power. He breathed the word and all the stars were born. That's power. He assigned the sea its boundaries and locked the ocean in vast reservoirs. Let the whole world fear the Lord, and let everyone stand in awe of him. For when he spoke, the world began. It appeared at his command. We'll continue in Isaiah 40, verse 12. It says, who else has held the ocean in his hand? Who has measured off the heavens with his fingers? Who else knows the weight of the earth or has weighed the mountains and hills on a scale? Later in verse 15, it says, he picks up the whole earth as though it were a grain of sand. Picture that for a minute. That's power. A grain of sand, the whole world, right? There's an old song that says, oh, he holds the whole world in his hand, right? No, like he just picks it up like a little grain of sand. It continues later in verse 25 through 26. It says, to whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Asks the Holy One. Look up into the heavens. Who created all the stars? He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by name. Because of his great power and incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. This is real power. This is real power. He speaks and creation exists. He commands and oceans stop. He wills and history changes. He parts seas. He commands storms and he raises the dead. He holds the whole world in his hands. Actually, no, he actually holds the whole universe in his hand. I remember this, if you grew up in the 90s, there's this guy named Michael Jordan. Everybody was obsessed with, thought he was so great. He could palm a basketball. And there's this famous poster of him, and he's palming 2 basketballs. And a lot of kids my age had this on their walls when they were growing up. And they were all so excited about how he could palm this basketball. And then we're talking about a God that can palm the universe. Why do we stand in awe of humans that can do human things, but we lose our awe of the God that spoke the world into existence, that holds the universe in his hands? God doesn't just possess power, he defines power. He's the source of power, and no one has power unless he gives it to him. Think about that for a minute. No one has power unless he gives it to him. When we encounter true, incomparable, overwhelming, undeniable power, fear is the correct response. Not a fear that drives away, but a fear that draws near. One of awe and reverence. So I want you to picture this with me for a minute. Has anybody ever been to the ocean? You've been to the beach? Anybody like beaches? You like hanging out in the ocean? You imagine just you're standing on the shore and you're just looking out into the ocean. Right? It is beautiful. There's something about like a sunset or a sunrise coming over the ocean, and you just look at it, and it just has this beauty and awe to it, right? But the ocean's not tame. The ocean actually covers over 70% of the Earth's surface. It has an average depth of about 12,000 feet. At its deepest point, it's nearly 36,000 feet, which is almost 7 miles underground. If you put Mount Everest at the bottom of the ocean, it'd still be a mile underwater. That's how deep the ocean is. That's how much water there is here. And the pressure at the bottom of the ocean would crush a human instantly. It's not only massive, but it also moves with unstoppable force. Tsunamis can travel at 500 to 600 miles an hour. That's as faster than a jet. And it crosses the entire ocean. And waves can reach 100 feet high, and they can flatten cities in minutes. Storm surges carry the weight of billions of tons of water, and it'll reshape an entire coastline. Deadliest tsunami killed 250,000 people in minutes. The tallest wave ever recorded, and it wasn't the deadliest because I think it hit up in Alaska somewhere, so it was only like 5 people up there, So, but the highest wave, it rose higher than any building. It was taller than the Empire State Building. Can you imagine a wave coming at you the height of the Empire State Building? There's nothing that's going to stop that. There's nothing that stands in its way. And scripture says God holds the oceans in his hands. He tells it where to go and where not to go. That's power. That's power. We don't negotiate with the ocean and we don't vote what it should do. We issue warnings and evacuate because we know its power. And yet God says to it, this far and no further. He sets the boundaries, he commands it, and it obeys. That's the power of our God. And the ocean is not evil, but it demands respect, and so does God. Because if you don't respect the ocean, it will not end well for you. The same is true of our all-powerful God. Now think about this. If you lift your eyes up from the sea and look at the sky, have you ever looked up in the sky on a clear night and just full of stars? Anybody here a stargazer? You like just looking at stars? Yeah, I just love, there's just an incredible thing in a super clear night, especially if you're outside of town and there aren't hardly any lights around or anything. It's just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful, right? The naked eye can see about 5,000 stars on a clear night. But that's not the universe. That's just what we can see. That's what we can comprehend. We hear words like galaxies and light years, and I think many times we've heard these so many times we forget what they actually mean. When I hear the word light year, all I think is Buzz Lightyear. If you watch Toy Story, you know what I'm talking about. And I think about where the kids got a hold of it and it's hitting. It's like buzz, 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 Lightyear to the rescue. That's what I think about when I hear Lightyear. It's a great movie. Anyway, love that. So let's try to translate what the size of the universe actually means. So let's start with the speed of light. Speed of light travels at 186 miles per second. Now, I've gone pretty fast. I'm not going to tell you how fast, but I've gone pretty fast on a motorcycle and an airplane, lots of different vehicles. I've gone pretty fast. But 186,000 miles per second. That means in 1 second, light travels around the world 7 times. In 1 second, that's how fast. And in 1 minute, it travels over 11 million miles. In 1 hour, it's 670 million miles. And in 1 year, it's nearly 6 trillion miles. And that's what we call a light year. 6 trillion miles. I don't think our brains can actually comprehend that size. That's just 1 light year, right? So let me put this into perspective a little bit here. The sun is about 93 million miles away from the earth. 93 million miles. It takes 8 minutes for the sun's light to get to earth. So when you're watching and you see that beautiful sunrise, it actually happened 8 minutes ago. It's just finally getting to you. Right? When you start thinking about that, that's kind of a wild thing to think about. Is it actually happens before you actually can see it. And in the grand scheme of things, that's actually pretty close because the nearest star is 4.24 light years away. That's the closest star outside of our sun to the earth. 4 light years away. That means when you're looking up into the sky, the light that came off of all of those stars happened years ago. It started years ago and it's just now finally reaching you. It's incredible to think about. And the closest one's 4. There's so many more. It's unreal. In our galaxy, the Milky Way is about 100,000 light years wide. 100,000 light years wide. 100,000 times 6 trillion. I don't know what that is, but it's a big number that we struggle to comprehend. And that is the Milky Way. And that is what galaxy that we are part of here in our solar system. And scientists believe that there are over 100 billion galaxies, each containing billions or trillions of stars. And the numbers, they grow so big that our minds simply stop being able to process. Scientists estimate that there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth. That's a lot of stars. And get this, God knows them, names them, and sustains them, every one of them. We read it. He measured the heavens with the span of his hand. The span of your hand is from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your pinky. That's it. Just our galaxy is 100,000 light years wide, and he said the whole universe. Measure it. If that doesn't tell you we serve a big God, I don't know what does. When you start really putting that in, it's even really difficult for us to comprehend just how big our God is. And here's the shocking part. This God, the same God who rules a universe this vast, he invites us to know him personally. He invites you individually to know him personally. If that doesn't hit your heart this morning, check your pulse. Because that is amazing. That doesn't make any logical sense. We can't even get our neighbors to want to know us intimately, let alone the God of the universe. That's why the only appropriate response is not casual belief, but awe. Awe of who he is. This is the God that we fear, and his power is completely unmatched. And that's what we read in Psalm 33:8. It says, "Let the whole world fear the Lord, and let everyone stand in awe of him." So we have to stand in awe of him. Anxiety grows when we overestimate our power and forget what his power is. Well, I hear so much about anxiety. If you could talk to 5 people, all 5 of them are going to tell you they got problems with anxiety today. That is 100% because they're just trying to live in their own power and they forget the power of the one true God that we serve. They're not walking in relationship to understand it. He has all the power. There is nothing to be afraid of except for God himself. Awe grows when we remember who he is, but it's so easy for us to forget who he is because we wake up every day and we're just living life and we're in the rat race of life and all the things that we're worried about and all those things, and we leave God behind. But when we truly think about who he is, we stand in awe of him. We need to wake up every day in awe of who God is. The Almighty, the all-powerful God. And we have to live in awe because he wants a relationship with you. So I encourage you this morning, cling to him. That's where I love that song we sing. It says, "The more I seek you, the more I find you, the more I love you." Man, if we just lived that out in our lives every day, the world would change. It's that simple. When we seek the one true God with all of our hearts and we live in awe of him and cling to him and diligently seek him every day, it'll change everything. So while we struggle to comprehend the distance to the nearest star, God names them all. He names them, sustains them. And that's not just power. It's majesty. Power produces awe, but majesty demands a response. Because God's majesty demands surrender. You know, when I was writing this, I almost had require surrender. But as I was working on it, God put in my heart, it's like, no, it demands surrender. Because it's going to happen whether you like it or not. Because he is king, regardless of whether you choose to surrender or you will surrender regardless. And it demands surrender. Let's read a couple of passages on this in Hosea. This is a prophecy. He says, but afterward, he's talking about all the different things that are going to happen to Israel at this time. He says, but afterward, the people will return and devote themselves. They will return and devote themselves to the Lord their God and to David's descendant, their king. In the last days, they will tremble in awe of the Lord and of his goodness. So now fast forward, and Paul's talking about this. He's talking about who Jesus is in Philippians 2:9. He says, therefore, God elevated him, talking about Jesus. He elevated Jesus to the place of the highest honor and gave him the name above all other names. And that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. Nobody's getting out of this. Everybody's bowing because his majesty demands surrender. And every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. Majesty isn't a word that we use in common language today. I don't know, when's the last time you said majesty in part of your normal language? Probably not. I mean, we live in America. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. Majesty. But majesty is power paired with position. He has the position of power and he has the power. It's both of those combined. And that is because God is not just strong and powerful, but he's also king. And every knee will bow, heaven, earth, and under the earth. So even those that don't accept him now will bow and confess that he is Lord. We will all surrender and we will all bow before the one true king. But there's a big difference for those who choose to surrender in this life. I encourage you, choose to surrender now. I want to tell you a story about somebody who was fully surrendered to God. There's this man named Abraham. Many of you have probably heard this story before. But God promised Abraham a son. He promised him a nation. He promised him a future. And Isaac, this baby that he had, was that future. And the entire promise was in this one child. He was the hope. He was the promise. He was the legacy through which God said everything would come. And then God tested Abraham. Has anybody ever been tested before? How many times when you're being tested, you're like, how do I get out of this instead of what do you want me to teach in this? Or what do you want me to learn through it? There are way too many times where we're being tested and we're going through challenges. And instead of us focus on what do I need to learn and how do I need to grow, we're trying to figure out how we get out of it. But the reality is if we're walking after and we're pursuing and clinging to the one true God, we should be looking at God, what do you want me to do through this? What are you trying to build in me today? How can I be more obedient in challenge and testing rather than just in the good times? So God asked Abraham to surrender what mattered to him most, his son Isaac. Not because God needed Isaac, but because God wanted Abraham's heart. God wanted Abraham's heart. And Abraham obeyed without delay. Think about what is the most important thing to you in your life. And if God asks you right now, say, give it up right now, this minute. How quick are you going to be like, yep, no problem. But that's exactly what Abraham did. He traveled 3 days knowing what God had asked him to do. I can't imagine what the conversation was like with his son Isaac. 3 days walking alongside him, knowing that God asked him to sacrifice his son. That's what they were going to do. They're walking, they traveled 3 days. And then he built the altar. And then he started binding his son on the altar. Can you imagine what that conversation was like? How do you think that was going down between them? Do you think that broke his heart? Do you think he was saying, oh, I think about, we tell ourselves all the time, oh, God's not going to give me more than I can handle. I want to challenge that a little bit this morning. Oh, God's going to give you more than you can handle. Because when you can't handle it, that's where we have to turn to God. Because if he only gives you what you can handle, it's all in your own strength. Abraham was not operating in his own strength. He was operating out of a relationship that was completely surrendered to the one true king. God will give you more than you can handle because he wants you to be reliant on him and to step in a relationship and only do the things that are only possible in relationship with him. So he bound his son and he raised the knife. And at the final moment, God stepped in. We read in Genesis 22:12, it says, don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. Many times we just want God to just be like, oh, I fear, I got it, right? Just trust me. No, there's going to be times where he's going to put you to the test and you're going to find out where the rubber meets the road. You're going to find out where your really heart is because it's lived out. It's not words, it's actions. He continues, says, you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And this verse reveals the heart of surrender to the one true king. The fear of the Lord is not terror. It's holding nothing back. That's what the fear of the Lord does in our hearts, in our lives. Abraham feared God more than his own understanding, more than his future, and even the promise itself. How many times we're like, well, God told me this is what I'm going to do, and so I'm going to just do whatever it takes to make it happen. And if God asks us to do something that seems contrary, we turn on God instead of just being obedient to him. But God calls us to obedience. He doesn't have to explain himself. Abraham could have just been whining and complaining about, God, why did you turn on me? Why did you do all this? All these things you promised. He could have just been whining about it. Instead, he just was obedient because he feared God more than his own understanding, more than his future, and more than the promise itself. Because when you fear God, nothing outranks him. Nothing outranks him. We live in a culture today that rejects authority, it mocks leadership, and has never lived under a king. But the truth remains. Eventually, opinions don't matter. It doesn't matter what you think is right and wrong. It doesn't matter what you think God should or shouldn't do. It doesn't matter what's happening in your church if you think it's the right thing or the wrong thing. At the end of the day, there is a king and he reigns in power and majesty. And all that matters is knowing and surrendering to the one true king. That's all that matters. Quit caring so much about your own stinking opinions and be obedient to the one that matters. God doesn't care whether or not you like what he does. Because he does not answer to you, we answer to him. And just as we see in Abraham, true surrender is trusting God even when obedience costs us deeply. So I challenge you to consistently pursue a deeper level of surrender to the one true king. Because God's majesty demands surrender. And he's worthy. And he is worthy. But guess what? Here's what's amazing. This last part. It just kind of utterly baffling. We have this all-powerful, majestic God. And he's our refuge. And his authority, God's authority, protects and provides for us. When I think about the awesomeness of God and when I think about who he really is, I can't help but agree. In Psalm 8, it says, when I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for them. It doesn't even make sense. Why in the world does he care about us as a little speck on a grain of sand? I don't know if you've ever seen that Men in Black movie. And I remember like they're chasing like this movie it's a sci-fi movie, but they're chasing after this galaxy and they're thinking it's a huge thing. And it's actually like this thing on a collar of a cat. It's this tiny little ball and that's a whole galaxy within that. And then it does a whole mind twist thing on it. At the very end, they open up this door and they see that they're actually living in a galaxy that's just a marble. And there's some other creature that comes and gathers it up and throws it in a bag of a bunch of other galaxies. And when you really think about how small we are and compared to this vast God, why does he care? So in Proverbs 14:26 and 27 says, those who fear the Lord are secure. He will be a refuge for their children. Fear of the Lord is a life-giving fountain. It offers escape from the snares of death. In Psalm 34:9, it says, fear the Lord, you godly people, for those who fear him will have all that they need. If you're struggling and if you feel like you're fighting losing battles and that you don't have all the provision that you need, fear the Lord is the answer. You got to ask yourself, am I walking in the fear of the Lord? Because when we live in the fear of the Lord, here's what's great. When we live in the fear of the Lord, we can live fearless because we don't have to fear anything else. If you truly walk in fear of the one true King, you can be fearless in this life because there's nothing else to be afraid of. Because who can come against us? If God is for us, who is against us? There's nothing else to be. So we can live fearless. We stand firmer, we trust deeper, and we live boldly because God is for us. So I want to tell you another story about Elijah that really drove this home. And man, when I was reading through this, I was like, oh my goodness, man, this is so good. And this just walks through so many things. Because in this life, I don't know about you guys, but there's one way that I think my life should go, and then there's how it actually happens. And those two things almost never line up. And it's always like, what in the world is going on? And even when I'm trying to obey God, it's like, this doesn't make any sense. What is going on? Like, I'm doing what you're telling me to, but we're not seeing the results that I expected to see. But when we truly trust him, it's mind blowing. So Elijah, he steps into the presence of a king. And at that point in time, kings, they answer to nobody, right? So if you stepped in and he didn't like you, he just cut your head off. Like, no questions asked. That's the power of the king in that time, right? When I talk about we lost the the fear and respect of authority, okay, at that point in time, authority meant something. We don't have that kind of authority around here anymore. I mean, worse you go to prison and hang out and you get a better life than half the people living on the streets. Okay, so he steps into the presence of the king, one of the most powerful men in Israel, and declares judgment on him. He says, "As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, there will neither be dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." And that's not Elijah's power, that's the authority of God working in his life. So the skies close and the rain stops and the economy completely collapses. And then God does something completely unexpected. Instead of surrounding Elijah with a host of angels, he actually hides him. He tells him, he's like, go east and hide in the brook of Chariton. Now, I don't know about you, but if God just asked me to do something that big and that dangerous, I would expect God to show up in a big way, not ask me to go run and hide in the woods. But that's exactly what God asked him to do, and he obeyed. And so he goes and he's protected, not because he's strong, but because God places him exactly where he wants him. So Elijah, now if you look at this from his perspective, now he's alone. He's got no paycheck. He's got no safety net. He's got no army. He's got no visible supply. He just left town with the clothes on his back. But he did what God asked him to do. So instead of fearing other people, he feared God instead. And yet what happened was the brook provided water for him. And the ravens brought bread and meat every morning and every night. Now, hold on. I think we read over that and we're like, oh, that's cool. Ravens show up. No, hold on. These are unclean birds. They are natural scavengers. They don't like to share. They're more selfish than a 1-year-old. Okay? Yet they obey the command of God because creation listens when the Creator speaks. Creation listens when the Creator speaks. And if God can command birds, he can command provision. And it's not about abundance, but about daily dependence. Many times we look at it as like, well, our life might not be right, or we might not have a relationship with God because we're not living in abundance. God didn't call us to live in abundance. He called us to live in dependence of him. And that's often how God trains those who fear him. We're called to live in daily dependence on him. And then guess what happens? Eventually the brook dries up. And now instead of turning on God and complaining and being like, God, why'd you bring me out here to die and all that? And it's not because God failed, and it's not because Elijah sinned, but because the season changed and God's power did not disappear. It redirected. And so God told him, he's like, all right, head over to this other village. I've commanded a widow there to supply you with food. So now God sends Elijah into enemy territory. Now, it's hard for us to comprehend like enemy territory because we live in the US and it's like, what is enemy territory? But he sends him into enemy territory and into poverty, to a widow with nothing. So the point is, the fear of the Lord does not remove risk, it removes abandonment. God will not abandon you if you are walking in the fear of the Lord. But it doesn't mean that there isn't risk. We have to walk in obedience to that. So Elijah meets the widow, and she's gathering sticks for her last meal, and she's like, "I only have a little bit of oil and yeast left, or what flour left? Yeah, flour and a little bit of oil. And we're gonna go. Me and my son, we're gonna go eat our last meal and die." That's the widow that God brought him to. Right? That doesn't sound like a very happy person. It doesn't sound like provision to me. It doesn't sound like the blessings of God for obedience. Right? But Elijah says, don't be afraid. Please make a small loaf for me first. And she obeys. And from that moment on, the flour never runs out. The oil never runs out. They continue to eat meals, and there's always enough every single day because God provides for them. God's provision doesn't start with excess. It starts with obedience. There's a lot of that because in today's world, we live out of a position of excess. We are so blessed in America today, in our economy today, that we all live out of excess. There are very few people that have ever actually had to give until it hurts, right? You could give 10%. A lot of people can give 20% of their income and it doesn't even change their lifestyle. When's the last time you had to give up something that actually hurts? God didn't call us for a life of luxury. It's not about overflow. It's not about luxury. It's about having enough because God's power sustains what human strength cannot. So then they're eating, everything's going according to plan. They feel like God's got this, right? We got the endless jar of flour and oil. We can make as much bread. We can live forever. Everything's going great. And then the unthinkable happens. The widow's son dies. This is a rough story, right? You're like, man, if I'm living in the will of God, I feel like everything should be going right. Everything should be a blessing. Like all the stars should be aligning because I'm doing what God's telling me to do. But that's not what this story says. Provision seems pointless if the protection fails. And so his faith is tested again. And his hope is shaken. And Elijah cries out to God and he prays over this boy. And he prays to him, God, bring him back to life. And God raises the dead. This is the same God who shut the skies, fed the prophet, multiplied the meal, and now he raises the dead. And in 1 Kings 17:24, it says, then the woman told Elijah, now I know for sure that you are a man of God and that the Lord truly speaks through you. Because when we walk in the fear of the Lord, not only does the impossible become possible, not only does he always care for our every need, not only does he protect us, he also uses us to be a witness of his greatness to others in a way that they stand in awe of God. So when you walk in the fear of the Lord, other people stand in awe of how great our God is because he shows up. When we walk in obedience and truth, God uses us as a witness. You may not understand why a season dried up. You may not understand where provision is going to come from or where protection is going to come from in your life. You may not understand when God tells you to do something. I think about a story of, and I probably have shared this before in the past, but there's a story of this gal and she's driving in her car and she's like, all right, God, I want to do whatever you tell me to do. I'm ready. Tell me whatever it is. And so she comes up to a stop sign. He's like, all right, turn left. Okay. And then turn right. All right. And she's driving and it's like, all right, pull into this gas station. Okay. And now he's like, all right, go into the gas station. All right. So she goes into the gas station and then God tells her, all right, go in front of the cashier and stand on your head. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd be like, that doesn't make any sense, God. I'm not doing that. Right? Yeah. I can't do that, right? Physically not possible. Right? Evidently this, however. So she finally is just like, all right, now I said I was going to do whatever God asked me to do. This is where it really happens, right? The easy thing is to turn right and left. The easy thing is to go into the gas station, do normal things. The hard part is when God asks us to do something that doesn't make any sense. Now you find out, do you really fear the Lord and do you really want to obey God? Or are you just saying that? So she's like, all right, I'm going to do it. So she goes up there and she's like, ooh, look what I can do. And she turns on her head, right? And the cashier just breaks down and starts bawling. Because he said, I just prayed that God, if you're real, bring somebody in here and have them stand on their head. Now, she had no idea, right? It didn't make any sense to her. But that's the God that we serve. When we're obedient to him, he uses us in ways that we never thought were possible. So where people will stand in awe of who he is. If you want to be used by God to change the world, you just got to walk in the fear of the Lord. That's it. That's the answer. It won't always make sense, but I can guarantee that he will always provide and protect for you. I guarantee that you can always trust the one that's in control. The God who holds the seas and names the stars, the God who is the King of kings, the God who protected and provided for Elijah is the God who holds your life. And he is worthy. He is worthy of fear and awe. Remember, when we fear God, we become fearless. Let's be fearless. Let's walk in fearlessness. Because if God is for us, who can be against us? That's such a powerful line. That's right out of Romans chapter 8. It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Romans chapter 8. If you haven't read it for a while, man, read Romans chapter 8 every day for a month. It'll change your life. If God is for us, who can be against us? We should be living fearless. So I want to wrap this up. God's power is unmatched. God's power is completely unmatched. God's majesty demands surrender. And God's authority protects and provides. So I want to encourage you this week. I want to encourage you to bow in fear and awe to the one who's worthy this week. I want you to take a minute, find some time. And, we don't bow normally as part of our culture, but I want to encourage you, find some alone time, get on your knees. And I know that's harder for some than others, but get on your knees and bow before the one that's worthy. Find some time. Don't get busy. Find some time and just bow in fear and awe because he is worthy. And I encourage you, trust in his strength, not yours. Because if you're relying on your own, you got every reason to be scared of things if you're not walking in his strength. Because when you walk in the fear of the Lord, you can be fearless. And I encourage you, rest under his rule. There is peace. One of the things we want most is peace in this life, and it's found under his rule. So we have to surrender to him.